Do you guys remember around this point last year what we had a big debate about amongst ourselves? And only Taylor agreed with me. Around the time of my birthday, it is time to start doing fantasy football research.
Oh, God.
It is not too early.
That's what we were talking about. So we're going to get on the subject of if it is or isn't too early for fantasy again. You're semi wrong because I wouldn't start looking at anything fantasy related until July hits. And we're knocking on the door July. It's the end of June.
It's a couple days
Still,
away.
I would say after the 4th of July, man, after the fireworks have gone
1
off,
week.
rockets red glare.
Hall of Fame game has to happen first for me.
Oh, no, that's way too late. Way too late.
I got to do a couple mocks before then.
Yeah. Nope. Nope. Not touching it until the Hall of Fame game's over.
No.
I would say probably once everyone starts showing up for training camp, because that's whenever we'll start to see injuries happen. And until I don't want to wish upon any type of injuries, but once those start to come in and we start to see rosters, then we would have a better idea of draft stock and where everyone's going to be once fantasy actually gets here.
I don't know, man. I think your research should be well-rounded. And then when injuries start to happen, you can start to take those guys out of your research. So you don't have to do more work later on. But
you have your bona fides in the top 4 rounds, and then everything after that is pretty much you're looking for consistency, and then you get your lottery picks later.
Well,
that's what you're doing.
There's going to be a couple of things where people are going to have widely varying opinions. Like, where does Travis Kelce go? First rounder last year. Definitely not a first rounder this year. I think 3rd or maybe even 4th. I probably wouldn't
Someone's
touch him.
Someone's going to just see the name and still draft him early.
Oh, yeah. That's why we have Richard in our league. I'm sorry, Richard.
Welcome to the Circus Catch.
I'm always up for the challenge.
Are you kidding me? Guess who called that one?
I am dubbed the Houston player hater. I don't have time to believe.
You got butthurt.
What is he thinking?
Is he the greatest of all time? It is like magic.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Circus Catch, and another champion has been crowned. In fact, 2 champions were actually crowned on Monday. We'll get into both of those. The big one we're going to talk about first is the NHL's newest champion. First time ever, Florida Panthers have won the Stanley Cup. Welcome to the Circus Catch. My name is Jordan. I'm joined today by Jesse Larson and Jackson Cochran. Fellas, welcome to the show.
Hey.
What's going on, guys? How we doing today?
Good.
I almost took a nap before we started to record, so I'm glad I didn't take a nap.
I'm glad you didn't too. I mean, we could have just had the camera on you sleeping, but yeah, wouldn't have been much fun.
Nah.
All right, guys. Well, let's get right into it. Like I mentioned, the Panthers are Stanley Cup champions, the first championship in franchise history, and what a series it was. Looked like it could have been a sweep, but we got to see a full slate of 7 games in this series.
What are the 2 best words in sports? Game 7s. And we got to see that. And the fact that you were thinking that it was going to potentially be a reverse sweep whenever it was looking like it was going to initially be a regular sweep. And it just looked like the Oilers were gassed by the very end of it. I know that we were in our text thread last night, and I agree with you, Jesse. You said that the Oilers, Edmonton, they were gassed. Yeah, you're playing from behind and you're giving it your all. And unfortunately, this is one of the lower scoring matchups in the actual Stanley Cup final, right? I believe so. And nothing better than just a 1-point game. Unfortunately, Edmonton, they didn't have Cinderella. They weren't the Cinderella story that we were hoping for. And the Stanley Cup gets to stay here in America. A lot of Americans are happy about that. Doesn't need to go back up to Canada. It's going to be another long drought until it makes its way back up to north of the border. But we're going to keep the Stanley Cup here in the great old US of A.
Yeah, I think both stories would have been great, honestly. Having Edmonton capture Canada's first cup since the Canadians way back in the early 90s. And also the Florida Panthers story. I mean, this team was the pinnacle of mediocrity for 25 years. You know, they won a playoff series in 96, and they didn't win another playoff series, and only had 2 trips to the playoffs in that entire span until they got it done in 2022. So I think both stories are great. And the way this shaped up was just picture perfect. I mean, Edmonton did not look like they could compete with Florida in the first 3 games. And then they went and steamrolled Bobrovsky and that defense in game 4. It wasn't even close. And then they kept going, guys. And they got it to a game 7, but just didn't have the energy, didn't have what they wanted going their way. And Bobrovsky came up clutch when it mattered most. Yet again, he won. He allowed less than 1 goal or less in all 4 or all of the series clinches throughout the playoffs. And, you know, as much as I wanted him to win the Conn Smythe Trophy, there was no question in my mind that Connor McDavid definitely still deserved it. And we'll get up more into that in a sec. But, I mean, like I told you last night, Jordan, both stories are great. But what the Panthers went through for the better part of this century so far is nothing short of a miracle that they are in this position that they are now.
Would you say that the Oilers ran out of fuel?
I'll see myself out.
All right, sorry guys. No more dad jokes. I gotta keep you on. I can't talk about this by myself. So let's get back into it. So we started 3-0. Obviously went to a game 7. Could have been a reverse sweep. Like I told you guys last night, the Panthers, one of the biggest things they did internet-wise was save themselves from a lifetime of memes. We were thinking, okay, another 28-3, but the hockey version. No, they gave it their all. And to your point, Jesse, Bobrovsky was stellar last night. Really let it slip in games 5, 6, and 7. But he was a monster throughout the series in each one of those wins. And, you know, to that point, 1 goal or less in the series clinchers in every series. I thought he could have got the Conn Smythe Trophy, but Connor McDavid definitely well-deserved as well.
Yeah, I mean, the guy had 42 points throughout the playoffs.
It's hard to argue against that, yeah.
It's hard to argue against that because that is unheard of. Even the great one didn't do that. You know, you just can't argue against Connor winning it, and I don't. I love Bobrovsky. I think he's one of the best goalies in the game right now and has been even when he was in Columbus. But man, Connor McDavid was just that guy for Edmonton. I mean, to all the credit to Leon Draisaitl and, you know, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, they were the pieces that McDavid needed to get Edmonton to this point, and they are part of the reason why we saw 7 games and we didn't see a 4-game sweep. But just what Florida, it would have been such a Florida thing to do too, to be up 3-0 and boom, Edmonton wins 4 straight to win a cup. And there's only been one other team to do that, and it was the Detroit Red Wings back in like the 40s or something like that. So, you know, but that would have been a Florida thing. Like, that is what this franchise has been known for. They're the pinnacle of mediocrity. Like I said, I mean, it would have just been the icing on the cake for them to go out like that this year after everything that they did last year to put the effort in to squeak into the playoffs and then race to the Stanley Cup Finals, coming up short. But then they got back. They almost won a President's Cup, but they didn't, and they still got it done against that President's Cup winner when it mattered most. And they put their foot to the floor and they never quit. Even when it got ugly in games 4 and 5 and 6, they still battled and they came out on top. And that's what the Panthers franchise and what this fan base deserves because of what has gone on for this franchise the last, quarter century.
Yeah, the 1942 Detroit Red Wings stand alone as the only team to get reverse swept in the Stanley Cup Finals. Now, it's happened 4 times, including that one in 42, but only once in the Stanley Cup Final. Florida Panthers, well-deserved. Congratulations to them. They played their hearts out in Game 7.
Even though that Edmonton did end up losing, their fans, they traveled well. You could see so much orange in the stands last night, and those tickets were not cheap. I think just like some of the highest points in the actual stadium, I believe we're selling for close to $300 just for one seat. And obviously on the glass, it was about, depending on where you were sitting, close to $9,000 to $12,000 a ticket there. So obviously, if you saw some orange up front on that glass, you know they spent a pretty penny just to get there.
So South Florida is in a state of pure bliss right now. Jesse, let's talk about the other side real quick. Let's talk about Edmonton. What does this loss mean for their franchise, for Connor McDavid, and going forward, is there hope for them to win with this current squad?
I definitely think there's still hope for this team to perform well. They're definitely still a playoff team. I don't know the specifics of Leon Draisaitl or Ryan Nugent-Hopkins' contract, but they've got Connor McDavid in a good spot. And I know even listening to some of the interviews and listening to Sean McDonough talk on the broadcast last night, this is definitely like a bittersweet award in the Conn Smythe Trophy for Connor McDavid, because he's the type of guy that doesn't really care about individual achievements, right? This was the destiny for him coming here to Edmonton, then building this team around him, a Stanley Cup title and lifting Lord Stanley's Cup. That is what they wanted, and that's what they've been so close to getting a couple times now. They were, I think it was 2006 that they got to the Stanley Cup final, and I don't want to say they were robbed, but they were kind of robbed. I won't go into detail on that, but I just think in the future, this is still a good team, has pieces around them, young talent too, that's going to come up in their organization. This isn't the end for Edmonton. And just like it wasn't the end for Vegas in their inaugural season, look what they did less than 5 years later. They won a Stanley Cup. Similar can be said for Florida. They were mediocre for 25 years, got to a Stanley Cup final, lost it, and then the following season, they won it all. So do not discount Edmonton. I don't want to say that it's too early to talk about, but this is definitely a favorite team in the Western Conference coming next season. I guarantee it.
I'm sure that Panthers fans are glad that I wasn't in South Florida this year, because I was in Vegas last year when they lost to the Golden Knights. So I'm sure Panthers fans are relieved that I was back in California this time.
But I want to speak on just Connor McDavid as well. He's only 27 years old. And you were saying, Jesse, they've been building around him. And there's no doubt that they should be one of the favorites for next season. It's just, yeah, he's still technically in his prime. So I wouldn't see Edmonton not being considered to make the playoffs at all, and even getting as far as they did this season. Hopefully within the next few years, they can actually finally hoist the Stanley Cup. But, hockey is one of those crazy sports where anything can happen in the postseason, because you don't see that many reverse sweeps happen, and it was almost there.
I do want to talk real quickly about a man who was out of hockey for a little bit, came back, and is now a Stanley Cup champion. And that would be the coach of the Florida Panthers, Paul Maurice. Now, he does have the most losses in NHL history, but you don't get that many losses without being good enough to get those opportunities. Look at Kobe Bryant. He's missed the most shots in NBA history. Nobody's going to call that man a scrub.
This is only his 11th playoff appearance. He's missed the playoffs just as much as he's been to the playoffs. In his coaching career, started out, didn't make it for his first 4 seasons as a head coach. He made it with Carolina. But this is his first real dive into deep in the playoffs, other than with Carolina, like I mentioned. So he knows success and he knows failure, obviously, like you mentioned, Jordan. So I credit him a lot, because I think him coming on to this team, he resigned in the middle of the season with Winnipeg in 22. And he thought his career coaching in the NHL was over. And he was, I listened to an interview. I think he was fishing on a random weekday when he got the call from Florida's GM, and they wanted him to come back because they had just fired their head coach. I don't know if you guys know the saga of the Chicago Blackhawks and their sexual abuse scandal, but they had hired Joel Quenneville. So Joel Quenneville was fired by Chicago, and then he resigned when he went to Florida, And then the scandal broke out with the Chicago Blackhawks and their sexual abuse issue during that season. And it came to light that Quenneville knew kind of what was going on. So he resigned, he stepped out, and Florida looked like, okay, here we go again. Here we go again. We were getting there, and now this quarter century of mediocrity is just going to continue because it's all falling apart again. Enter Paul Maurice, and he has done what is necessary to get this team in a position. This guy was, in a sense, a kind of a saving grace for this franchise.
So, guys, let's take a look back at the journey that it took for Florida to get to their first Stanley Cup championship. Let's start with round one. Let's start with Tampa Bay, because that series automatically started the Panthers' run on a hot note. So, in my opinion, Game 5 was the definitive game. It was the only one that was kind of a bit of a blowout. There were two empty netters, so 6-1 looks like a bigger victory than it really was, but 4-1 would still be a huge victory in that series. You started off with, the usual suspects: Carter Verhaeghe, Alexander Barkov. Each of them had 2 goals in that final game with an assist. Just a series where Florida really put their stamp on the playoffs.
This was a catalyst for this team winning a title, because Tampa Bay had been that thorn in their side. They could not get past Tampa Bay in the postseason. They finally did it. And I think that was the morale booster, the confidence boost, that they could beat Boston, they could get past New York, who won the President's Cup, and they could win it all, finally.
After taking on Tampa Bay, they did indeed play the Boston Bruins. Now, this series, when everybody thinks about this series, I'm sure they're going to think about that contentious call in Game 3. The call that definitely went Florida's way, and Boston started throwing things on the ice. The "ref, you suck" chant going as loud as possible. Who knew that Boston fans were so passionate?
Passionate, disrespectful, take your pick.
Well, they got 1 championship this year. I think that's enough.
They've got 13 in the last 20 years. They can shut up.
Yeah, exactly. They don't need to. Yeah, I agree with Jesse.
Try
right
harder.
there.
Try
Yeah.
harder.
Come on, guys. What are you doing?
And it's not like that play, Jordan, defined the entire series either, because the series still went to Game 6 and Florida controlled Game 6.
The Eastern Conference Finals, as it should be, the Stanley Cup Final was the more epic series in the grand totality of things. But there were 3 games that went into overtime in this New York series. The only game in this series, in fact, not decided by 1 goal, was Game 1.
Yeah, the Panthers shut out the Rangers. Correct? Yeah, they shut them out 3-0.
It just looked to me like New York could not get out of their own way. And I don't want to take away anything from Florida, what they did, what they accomplished, but they wore New York down to make self-inflicted mistakes, and just, I think I talked about it with Austin on the show, but New York just could not hang on to the puck. They turned it over in their own zone, and Florida would capitalize on it. And that's what good teams do, is they break other teams down. Now, obviously, the Rangers were the quote-unquote better team because they were the better team in the regular season. The President's Cup was theirs. But we've talked about it at length before, about how winning in the regular season doesn't mean jack when it comes to the playoffs, because New York clearly did not look like a President's Cup team in the Eastern Conference Finals. Granted, like you guys talked about, 5 of the 6 games were 1-goal games, but there was just minute details where New York beat themselves and Florida took advantage. And again, Sergei Bobrovsky was electric in this entire series. So to me, he's the difference maker in that particular series.
All right. And then obviously the Stanley Cup Final, where we've talked about it already. Games 1, 2, and 3, pretty easily handled by Florida. Games 4, 5, and 6. Edmonton just completely turned things around. Game 5, I will say, though, the thing that stood out to me, and it didn't matter, but it looked cool, was the save on the empty net that Kachuk had, where he just laid his body on the line. It was a great save, but all for naught. A couple seconds later, they did end up scoring the goal. Game 7 was an all-time classic, and it's going to go down as one of the greatest games in NHL history. So we did talk about a lot of the players on Florida already, but I do specifically want to highlight the Finnish captain, Alexander Barkov, because this is the first time that a Finnish captain has led a team to a championship. He was the second overall pick in 2013 by the Florida Panthers, so seen a lot of bad times. Has been there now at the mountaintop, so congratulations to him, and congratulations to the entire Florida Panthers organization.
Yeah, and I lastly want to give a shout out to Sam Reinhart and Kyle Poso, who turmoiled with the Buffalo Sabres for years and never got anywhere. They were part of two of the worst teams in Sabres history, and it's teams that look like they were going to end careers. And similar with Reinhart, he went to Florida, and now he's a Stanley Cup champion. And I'm so happy for these two guys in particular because of what they went through in Buffalo. And, you know, it's just great to see guys that have the talent to be that part of a team like this actually get there after turmoiling with such bad management and bad ownership and terrible teams. They got there. They got out of that situation. They got to a good team and a good organization. And I'm hyped for them. I'm really hyped, especially for Sam Reinhart, to score the game-winning goal, the Stanley Cup winning goal. So I'm hyped.
So, guys, the Florida Panthers aren't the only team that was crowned champion on Monday. We actually have a brand new College World Series champion, the Tennessee Volunteers. It is their first championship in school history for college baseball, so congratulations to them. They did lose game 1, won game 2, and then won game 3 as well. Peyton Manning was in attendance for this one, guys.
Naturally supporting his alma mater. As bummed out as I am, guys, and I talked to you guys about this before, having two SEC schools in the finals yet again, just like we did last year, and it's happened 6 or 7 times in the last 15 years where we've had two SEC squads battle it out for a title, and there's been a SEC school in the final series every year with the exception of one for the past 15 years, and that was 2016. It's kind of disheartening. It takes a little bit away from the intrigue for me of the College World Series because I love college baseball so much. But Tennessee is the first number 1 overall seed to win it all since 1999 when Miami won it all. And 99 was when the new format was adopted and we had seeds for the first time. So kind of a full circle moment 25 years later that we finally see a number 1 seed win it all. And kudos to Tennessee, their first championship in program history. So, you know, it's good for them, but I'd love to see some parity come next season.
Maybe with a lot of the realignment, we'll probably get some more parity, especially since they're following the realignment of college football, since it's going to be unanimous across the board.
Mm-hmm.
But it probably is going to be another SEC school going to be in the championship yet again, since Texas and Oklahoma are making their way to the SEC now.
Yeah, and Oklahoma just won their first outright Big 12 title since, I think, 99 or 2000, something like that. So
Yeah,
their
the
baseball team is coming
softball,
around. Yeah.
and their softball team has been dominant for forever.
Don't know what to say. It just
Jesse is very aware of that.
I get it.
Sorry, Jesse.
The southeast part of the country, you can play baseball all year round. I get it. But you can do that in California and Arizona and Texas too. So it'd be nice to see some of these other southern schools do something. But NIL and money talk, and the SEC's got more money than anybody else. So,
Well, we talked about it last year. I believe it's the Rocco's Jello Shot Challenge.
yeah.
And I actually have the numbers for this season, like right in front of us, what took place in Omaha. So not
Do
only
tell.
did the Volunteers win the College World Series, but they also won the tally of the Jello shots with 32,573 over Texas A&M's 28,925. And those were the only teams that went over.
10,000.
Yeah, I'm looking
Yeah.
at it. That's, yeah. The only two teams that went over 25,000.
So, on that note, Jackson. So
Mhm.
last year when LSU, I think they had like 70,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
A lot of them were like the owner of the CEO of Raising Cane's called in like 10,000 Jello shots, and Rocco's like added those to the tally, and they just started giving them out for free. This year, they made people have to be in attendance, like they had to physically be there
Okay.
and order from a bartender how many Jello shots they wanted. Now they could order ever many they wanted, as long as they paid, obviously. But there was no more of the calling in orders and stuff like that, which was pretty cool to see. You actually had the massive conglomerate of fans that surround Omaha for the College World Series every year. And it was these people that were locally there in attendance ordering all these Jello shots. I mean, Rocco's challenge is now synonymous with the College World Series. It's something that we all track. They have their own Twitter page, their own Facebook page. It's just a thing. It's become a part of the College World Series spectacle, and it's awesome. But it's not surprising that Tennessee and Texas A&M, being the last two there, they did the best. But it was really disappointing to see how badly and how few the rest of the 6 teams that were there did.
In this College World Series, like last year, we saw with Paul Skeens, him just have insane, like major success right out the gate. In this series, do we have a player like that? Do we know of anyone on the Tennessee or Texas A&M side? Not really.
It's not really defined. I mean, this was just a group of guys. I mean, throughout the entire season, team batting average was high. You know, every guy in the lineup up and down was hitting the ball out of the ballpark. Great team ERA, especially their starting staff. It came together for Tennessee really well. I mean, it started off kind of rocky because it in their own regional, they I don't want to call it a misstep or anything, but there was a couple moments where we're like, is Tennessee going to make it out of their own regional? And then they came alive when it got to Omaha, especially, and it's just a cohesive group. Paul Skeens himself last year said that LSU had a great group of guys, but I think that he was the major catalyst to that team even getting a title. So to answer your question, no. Simply put, no. There's not a individual player for either Tennessee or Texas A&M that I think is an outright, immediate MLB All-Star, future All-Star. But they've got a group of guys that are definitely going to go pro ball and play well in the minors.
And also, we don't see that transition from college baseball like right away into Major League Baseball, because Skeens is one of those anomalies that was able to mow his way through minor league and get to Major League Baseball right away. It takes a long time. It could be potentially whoever's going to get drafted in this class. We might not see or hear from them for another 2 to 3 years as they're working their ways through all the way through AAA. It's just one of those things that it takes a little bit longer to develop in the minors. And once you get into the majors, then you'll see it. But I might see Christian Moore from Tennessee, possibly not like run his way through the minors, but I could potentially see that could be one of those guys that keep an eye on as his draft stock and see where he actually ends up getting drafted and potentially making it to the bigs. But that's the only player that has come to mind off the top of my head.
Yeah, and Dylan Dreiling was the most outstanding player of the College World Series for Tennessee. You know, he's obviously the one that played the best for them. I don't know his specific numbers off the top of my head, but yeah, Christian Moore, first College World Series cycle in what, like 70 years or something like that. You know, those are kind of like anomalies, I think. Personally, I think a cycle is just kind of it's not really a statistic to look at for like measured success personally. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but it just came together for him at the right time. And it's pretty exciting to see. But yeah, Christian Moore and Dylan Dreiling are like the only two guys I really think are going to be like quick successors into the minor leagues.
Just to that point, I would say beware of anomalies. People's stock always goes way higher when one thing happens.
True.
You got to look at the totality of what they've done.
True.
Exactly.
All right, guys. Well, we may disagree on when we need to start doing fantasy work, but at least we all agree that Circus Catch is the place to be. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show this week.
Thanks for having me, Jordan.
All right, fellas. Well, from up in Wisconsin down to Texas and out here to California, we will see you guys in 2 weeks. Sayonara.
Woo.